What do you read, my lord?
Words. Words. Words.
Words, words, words. The Elizabethans loved them. They relished them and they played with them, particularly with diphthongs, double vowels as in words. Probably they used many more words in a day than we do, and they were eager to pick up new ones. Here, for instance, is the clown Costard in Love's Labour's Lost. Another character gives him a letter and tips him.
Bear this significant to the country maid, Jacquinetta. Here is remuneration.
Now will I look to his remuneration. Oh, remuneration. That's a Latin word for 3 farthings. Remuneration! Remuneration! Why, it is a fairer word than French crown. I will never buy and sell out of this word.
My good knave, costed exceedingly well met.
But pray you, sir, how much carnation ribbon may a man buy for a remuneration?
What is a remuneration?
Oh, marry, sir, 8 farthing.
Why then 3 farthing worth of silver?
I thank you, worship. God be with you.
Stay, slave, I must employ thee. As thou wilt win my favour, good my knave, do one thing for me that I shall entreat. The princess comes to hunt here in the park, and in her train there is a gentle lady, and Rosaline they call her. Rosaline. Ask for her, and to her white hand see thou do commend this sealed up counsel. There's thy garden. Go.
Garden. Oh! Sweet garden! Better than remuneration. 11 farthing better. Most sweet garden! I will do it, sir, in print. Oh, garden. Remuneration.
Good. Well relished. Verbal relish. Today we're a bit apt to fight shy of it. But until we love individual words, we cannot love language. And if we don't, we won't be able to use it properly. As most actors' instincts push them towards the naturalistic, they don't go far enough. I believe that in rehearsal, at any rate, we should tend to go too far because we can always pull back later. So let's start exploring Shakespeare's language by looking at 1 or 2 individual words. Lisa, what would you say, if any, is the most important word in Shakespeare?
Remuneration.
What about time?
Time. Yes, time, indeed. It's dangerous territory, the word. There was a wonderful skit on television last year about a director telling an actor how to use the words.
All right, let's start right at the beginning, shall we?
Right, yeah.
What's the word? What's the word, I wonder, that Shakespeare decides to begin his sentence with here?
Time. First one.
Time.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah.
And how does Shakespeare decide to spell it, Hugh?
T-I-M-E.
T-I-M-E.
M. Yeah.
And what sort of spelling of the word time is that?
Well, it's the ordinary spelling.
It's the ordinary spelling, isn't it? It's the conventional spelling.
Oh.
So why, out of all the spellings he could have chosen, did Shakespeare choose that one, do you think?
Well, because it gives us time in an ordinary sense.
Exactly, well done, good boy, because it gives us time in an ordinary, in a conventional sense.
Oh, right.
So, Shakespeare has given us time in a conventional sense.
Yeah.
But he's given us something else here. Have a look at the typography. What do you spy?
Oh, it's got a capital T.
Shakespeare's T very much uppercase there,
Yeah.
Hugh, isn't it? Why?
Because it's the first word in the sentence.
Well, I think that's partly it. But I think there's another reason, too. Shakespeare has given us time in a conventional sense and time in an abstract sense.
Right.
All right?
Yeah.
Think your voice can convey that,
I
Hugh?
hope so.
I hope so, too. All right. Give it a go.
Just the one word.
Just the one word for the moment.
Yeah, okay.
Hugh. Where do we gather from?
Oh, the buttocks.
Always the buttocks.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Gather from the buttocks.
Right.
Thank you.
Time!
What went wrong there, Hugh?
I don't know, I got a bit lost in the middle, actually.
An awful warning. So we mustn't be too solemn about it. But we mustn't dodge it either. Shakespeare himself was obviously haunted by the word. He did indeed often give it a capital letter. So in spite of this dreaded warning, I intend to dig into it a bit later on. For now, I simply want to make the point that the correct pronunciation, or if you like, the correct pronunciation played, as it were, at 3/4 speed, is time. 2 vowel sounds. It has, as it were, 2 meanings. First, something factual, as in what's the time, and secondly, it does have a poetic resonance, a heightened meaning, i.e. that which is inexorable and wears down human life and endeavor, and in the end, death, something not to be avoided. Give us some examples.
Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth.
Despite of cormorant devouring time.
And that old common arbitrator, time.
Good. So let's look at a passage now where the speaker is entirely concerned with working on his audience with words and where nothing else matters. It's a chorus speech from Henry V. Let's work on it in the way we said at the outset. First, ask what the character's intentions are, and then we look at the language.
All right, but what about, well, the character of the chorus, or...
Well, I'm not going to talk about the character
No,
because you, David, are the character if you're the chorus.
Right.
You're the chorus, not playing one,
Right.
not a character. Just feel your way with the words. You've said in the beginning of the play, on your imaginary forces work, so on our imaginary forces work. Your intention is to make us feel, smell, see what it's like on the battlefield. And so you've got to find the language at the moment that you speak it. You use the words which you, David, need.
Right.
Have a go.
Now entertain conjecture of a time when creeping murmur and the pouring dark fills the wide vessel of the universe. From camp to camp, the hum of either army stilly sounds.
I think that's still a little bit too prepared.
Yes.
It's got to come out of you actually spontaneously. You don't know what you're going to say till you say it.
More excited.
Inside, yes.
Right. Now entertain conjecture of a time when creeping murmur and the pouring dark fills the wide vessel of the universe. From camp to camp, through the foul womb of night, the hum of either army stilly sounds, that the fixed sentinels almost receive the secret whispers of each other's watch. Fire answers fire, and through their paly flames, each battle sees the other's umbered face. Steed threatens steed with high and boastful neighs, piercing the night's dull ear. And from the tents, the armorers, accomplishing the nights. With busy hammers, closing rivets up. Give dreadful note of preparation.
Great. I thought the first half of it was great. And then you fell into a trap. You set up the...
I split it up too much.
No, you set up the atmosphere, the general atmosphere of the battlefield splendidly. But the verse and the text actually breaks into that. After we've got to... Each battle sees the other's umbered face. The text goes, steed threatens steed, where the verse goes, dum-dum-de-dum. And the steed, the noise of the neighing of the steed, breaks into the stillness of the night. And there's the bang of the armourers accomplishing the night with the busy hammers. Yeah. So you break the atmosphere that you set up with the noise of the troops.
Right.
Just take it from Each Battle Sees.
Fire answers fire. And through their paly flames, each battle sees the other's umbered face. Steed threatens steed, with high and boastful neighs, piercing the night's dull ear. And from the tents, the armourers, accomplishing the nights, with busy hammers, closing rivets up, give dreadful note of preparation.
That was much better. You took us with us. It was like the camera moving in from a long shot to a close-up of what was happening within the scene. It's actually a point we're going to come up to a lot later when we talk about set speeches. It's a great trap if you get onto one note, one tone, one tempo. One has to always look for the variety.
It's a difficulty, isn't it, when you're trying to actually coin phrases and words and images at the same time as also speaking blank verse, and you mustn't sacrifice one or the other.
That's right. You can mesmerize yourself with the words. Actually, if you go for the contrapuntal stresses in the verse, you will find the changes as they come.
Yeah, I'll go and work on that.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Well, we've talked about intentions and how the verse works, and we're beginning to marry the two traditions, Shakespeare's and ours. We're beginning to get a balance by finding the language and by making it our own. Now, let's look in detail at some of the major ingredients of language. First of all, what about resonance and onomatopoeia? Let's have some examples.
Swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean.
When the blast of war blows in our ears.
That the fixed sentinels almost receive the secret whispers of each other's watch.
Good. Now, what I think you were all doing there was doing it more closely to how probably Elizabethan actors would have taken it, and we rather fight shy of that in performance. And what I'm at tonight is to push us to going too far, just to see whether we don't fight shy of the language too much. And I think if it's as packed the language as that, you do have to take it as much as that. The need for verbal relish is obvious. Not too little, but of course not too much. Again, it's the question of balance. It's perhaps worth pointing to some words whose richness is not so apparent. Shakespeare's pronunciation was, of course, different from ours. It was rougher, perhaps more onomatopoeic. War, for instance, was pronounced war, and I, as in I, was pronounced a, and time was pronounced tame. Tame.
It's fascinating. I'm almost obsessively fascinated by the thought what it could have sounded like. I know you can do this. You should do it. But in 1590 on the South Bank, you know, when they had all those little theatres there, what was the noise? I mean, I can do it a bit, but you do.
Well, I'm not an expert, and I've often been corrected. But if we take the speech we've just done, it went a little bit like this. Now, entertain conjecture of a time when creeping murmur and the pouring dark filled the wide vessel of the universe. From camp to camp, through the foul womb of night, the hum of either army stilly sounds. Let the fixed sentinels almost receive the sacred whispers of each other's watch.
Actually, you know, that would have helped me a lot the first time I did it.
It's like almost like the west coast of Ireland or something, or the West Country.
Funny mixture of West Country, Ireland, a bit of American.
How do they know how it sounded then?
Well, they work it out partly from spellings and from rhymes, but mainly from the way a language changes. How did English get from Anglo-Saxon to Middle English to us today? And if it gets to us today, it must have gone through certain changes.
So how much of our accent would have influenced the American?
I think that the American accent is actually closer to the Elizabethan than ours. Funny, because American actors are always worried about not speaking what they call standard English, and actually they're doing it closer to Shakespeare than we are.
Yes, we always sound much more genteel now, don't we? Much more...
Yes, genteel, that's a good word. You see, it's rougher, isn't it? It's tougher.
In Australia, they pronounce the widow Dido as widow Dido.
Shakespeare actually has the widow Dido gag in the Tempest.
Does he?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. But anyway, there is still a glimmering sense of this richer sound in actors today. It's a sort of thespian folk memory, I suppose, more at the beginning of the century than now. Let's listen to a bit of Sir Frank Benson playing Mark Antony 50 years ago. He managed to make 2 syllables out of the word ears, for instance, and about 4 out of the word bones.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones.
Well, somewhat overdone, but not entirely un-Elizabethan. I think the big difference is that he's more sentimental than we'd be today. That sounds to me a bit sentimental, doesn't it? But diphthongs are, in fact, 2 vowel sounds. That's the point we were making. That's the point the Elizabethan pronunciation brings up, and indeed what Earl Benson brings up, even though he made them about 5. I think vowel sounds are important. I don't want to labour the point, because anybody who knows poetry knows that it doesn't just apply to Shakespeare. I merely want to stress that there's a tendency in our acting tradition to run away from it.
But we do run away from consonants too, don't we?
Yes.
They're just as important, aren't they?
Yes, if there's a danger of wallowing in vowels, there's a use in thinking of consonants as a stern corrective, and often they're more important. Why don't we just hear those 2 lines about the centuries again from Henry V?
That the fixed sentinels almost receive the secret whispers of each other's watch.
The whispering's there, the alliteration's obvious. The sounds are doing the whispering, aren't they?
There's almost as much breath as a well-supported vowel, don't they?
They do. See, that's a good example of why I have an instinct to take our verbal relish as far as we dare. It's partly because Shakespeare wrote with those old sounds in mind, but it's partly because I think we do at this moment in time tend to give short measure. We can't go far wrong, I think, if we just remind ourselves over and over of what we started with, which is Shakespeare's own view of the matter. So, Ben, just remind us Hamlet's advice to the players again.
Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounce it to you trippingly on the tongue. But be not too tame. Oh, that's a wonderful word, isn't it? Because we do get so tame. Be not too tame, neither, but let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action. Suit the action to the word to the action.
It's all there, isn't it? Not too little, not too much. Balance. I'm always struck by the sentence, suit the action to the word and the word to the action. I'm not sure, but I think Shakespeare is partly expressing here in Elizabethan terms what we've been expressing by the word intention. Intention equals what are you doing? Action equals that which you are doing. So, suit the action to the word and the word to the action. If I were to offer one single bit of advice to an actor new to Shakespeare's text, I'm not sure it wouldn't be more useful if I were to say, look for the antitheses and play them than anything else. We can very easily overlook them because we don't use antithesis very much today, particularly in our everyday speech. Yet Shakespeare was deeply imbued with a sense of it. He thought antithetically. It was the way his sentences over and over found their shape and their meaning. But as with alliteration, Shakespeare sometimes sends up excessive antithesis. Listen to Falstaff.
Harry, I do not only marvel where thou spendest thy time, but also how thou art accompanied. For though the chamomile, the more it is trodden on, the faster it grows, yet youth, the more it is wasted, the sooner it wears.
There's a triple antithesis in that, and they're not at all uncommon. The trouble is that the antithetical words at first blush are often somewhat hidden. For instance, in to be or not to be, we have about as simple an antithetical thought as one can get. But Hamlet's next sentence has key words which are not quite so obvious.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them.
If an actor doesn't point up antitheses, he will be hard and sometimes quite impossible to follow. Here's the beginning of Richard II's long soliloquy in Pomfret Castle.
I have been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. And for because the world is populous, and here is not a creature but myself, I cannot do it. Yet I'll hammer it out. My brain, I'll prove the female to my soul the father, and these two beget a generation of still breeding thoughts, and these same thoughts people this little world, in humours like the people of this world, for no thought is contented. The better sort, as thoughts of things divine, are intermixed with scruples, and do set the word itself against the word.
Good. Hold it there a moment. Set the word itself against the word. Now that's rather a useful piece of direction by Shakespeare, isn't it? Each new word in a sentence qualifies what has gone before or changes the direction of that sentence. The principle's the same as with antithesis. If you don't set up one word, you won't prepare for another to qualify it. And if the next word doesn't build on the first and move the sentence on, the audience and you, the actor, may lose the way.
Yeah, and as far as this particular speech is concerned, which I don't know very well, there seems to be two separate techniques being used, because his opening proposition is based on sort of laterally on sort of antithesis. I've been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world, and for because the world is populous and here is not a creature but myself, I cannot do it. Yet I'll hammer it out is the first strong intention of the speech. And then something different happens, which seems to be the accumulation of ideas, which often involves picking up one word from the end of a line to the beginning of the next. My brain, I'll prove the female to my soul the father, and these two beget a generation still breeding thoughts, these same thoughts people this little world, and so on. So for the actor scanning the text for clues, it suggests an accumulating energy and a forward movement.
That's right, it's a story, isn't it? Moving on.
The thing of pushing the thought through is really what is another problem with that speech, isn't it? It's the problem of inflection, which, like antithesis, is not something we use every day, and it's as modern actors we've often come across it. I mean, the inflection is what we use to carry that impetus of thought forward, isn't it?
Yes, I wish I had a nice, helpful definition of what an inflection really is. I suppose it's to stress something important, but partly it is an invitation, as Mike's just been saying, to the audience or to the person you're talking to go with you. It introduces a new thought, or it changes the direction of a sentence. It's like cutting from shot to shot in the television screen, isn't it? The new shot, the inflection, is the new information, and the story moves on.
What do we mean by inflection? we know we have this upward and downward inflection.
What does the dictionary say, I wonder?
I don't know.
Whatever it is, it's the shortest possible route between the speaker and the audience, isn't it? I mean, if you're dealing with difficult language, the actor has the privilege of having, and the good fortune of having lived with the language for a long time, and then has one opportunity only to convey it to an audience whose attention may be difficult to hold. And the inflection is the most economical and clearest way of doing that. I mean, for instance, you could say, to be or not to be, that is the question, without inflection. And you would probably be understood, but it would be more helpful if you say to be or not to be, that is the question. And equally, you could say to be or not to be, that is the question, and insult the audience's intelligence by doing that. So it's just a matter of hitting the mean, isn't it?
Again, it's a balance, isn't it? But you're quite right, it's really an invitation to the audience to go with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also carrying thoughts from that do go on from, in a verse situation, from the end of one line into the next line. It's holding that up in the air and moving it into the next line so that the thought at the end of the line isn't lost for the audience as you're going from one to the other.
Yeah. So far, we've looked at a lot of short examples. Now, let's stand back and have a look at the verbal impact of a whole speech. We'll take Henry V's speech rallying his soldiers at Harfleur, which we've heard bits of already. Now, Mike, awful lot could be said about this speech, and there's an infinity of interpretations, but what I want to concentrate on is Henry's use of his language. His intention is to rally his troops, and so his language is heightened because of his intention, not because it's a set speech. He works on them with words. So do it now to our audience and try and get them into the breach.
I think this speech particularly relies very much upon the army and their reactions to my speech.
Yeah.
So is it possible for the audience to perhaps heckle? And perhaps we could have these lazy lot. They can come and do some work.
Come and join Henry's army, and all of you, all of them, make it as difficult for Mike as possible, and you make it easier. Right, off we go then. Right.
Once more, run unto the breach! Dear friends, once more! Or close the wall up with our English dead! In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews. Summon up the blood. Disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage. Then in the eye a terrible aspect. Let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon. Let the brow o'erwhelm it, as fearfully as doth a galled rock o'erhang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. Now, set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to his full height. On, you noblest English, whose blood is fed from fathers of war-proof, fathers who, like so many Alexanders, have in these parts from morn till even fought, and sheathed their swords for lack of argument. Dishonor not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you called fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood, and teach them how to war. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slip, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon discharge cry, God for Harry, England, and St. George!
Well done. It's a useful exercise. But you see why I'm taking this example. The heightened language is so obviously there for a dramatic purpose. The character needs it to handle the situation, to handle his soldiers. Well, this is an obvious and extreme example, but I believe that the same thing will be found to apply to almost all, no, perhaps all, heightened speeches which we come to look at.
John, everything you said so far has been about language, but we haven't talked at all about character. So what about the character who speaks a language? Yeah?
Well, it's because I'm going for language this evening, and I think a good point comes up here is when in Shakespeare's text, the language, the text, the thing described, what I call the choric, actually is more important than the character. See what I mean?
Choric is hard.
Well, choric's a dreadful word, isn't it?
Yeah.
But let me say again what I mean by it. I mean when the text is about the thing it's describing and not about the character who's speaking it. And very often Shakespeare gives terrific speech to somebody who isn't important in the play as a character. I mean, let's take perhaps the extreme example in Shakespeare, which is the opening speech of Antony and Cleopatra. And Ben, you give us Philo. Philo is an unknown soldier who says this and never speaks or appears again in the play. Relish the words.
Yeah, is this the first utterance in the whole play?
First utterance in the play.
Heavens. Yeah.
So it's like the introduction to the whole story.
That's right.
So he can't be a character.
That's right, and it's my example of a choric speech. Your function is choric, and we want to know about Antony, and we want to know about Cleopatra, but we're not particularly interested in Philo.
And then I go around and count the house, take the tickets, do the teas. And
That's right.
sweep the car park. Nay, but this dotage of our generals o'erflows the measure. Those his goodly eyes that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars, now bend, now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front. His captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fights hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan to cool a gypsy's lust.
Good.
But John, there is a character thing here, isn't there? Because, I mean, the character himself is angry. It's not, I mean, so there's two things. It's not just that it's a choric speech, that it's giving us, the audience, a situation and information, but
It's like
the actor who's playing it
list,
has
isn't
got,
it?
That's
has
right.
got to be,
That's all.
has
Yes.
got to have his
It's
own
billing.
feelings.
Who gets
his
top
own-
billing in this?
Antony does.
Mars, actually.
Oh, Mark, good part.
No, this general,
No,
but Mars is the
you're
first.
absolutely right. In a sort of way, I'm cheating. What I was saying was, make the language your first concern, which Ben was doing. Now I would say to him, now that you've focused on the language and started to make the language work on your audience, now what the character feels, not necessarily what he is, but what he feels, his anger and bitterness and outrage at what he sees, has got to work into it to make it real.
Well, I suspect that it would only work for me if I tend to clutter, I think. I think as an actor I tend to clutter. And as an exercise, not clutter. And I think, I think that as an exercise I ought to always simplify. So I won't yet impose a character on these words. I'll still allow the words to try and push me into some shape.
That's right.
Because
But
they're very vigorous.
Something that would help push you into it is you actually come into it. If you start static, you'll be a bit static. But come in outrage out of what you've seen. Come into the scene.
Yes. All right. I'll try that. Yes.
Might give a good lead.
To tell us. No, come on.
Yeah. I could tell us. I could tell Roger.
Yeah. Yes.
And Beezer, if you're interested.
Maybe here.
And us.
Yes.
Nay, but this dotage of our generals, flows the measure. Those his goodly eyes, that o'er the files and musters of the war have glowed like plated Mars, now bend, now turn the office and devotion of their view upon a tawny front. His captain's heart, which in the scuffles of great fight hath burst the buckles on his breast, reneges all temper, and is become the bellows and the fan to cool a gypsy's lust.
I thought that was great. See, what we did is quite
Makes
interesting.
me shake, this language. Actually makes me shake. It is so strong.
So strong,
that if
yeah.
I let it push me, it's like getting a little vial of something and whacking it into your arm. If you let it...
Where is it?
This guy's a junkie, he's a freak, get him out of here. If you let it work on you.
Yes.
Yeah, the language made you angry. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
The language
Yes.
made you angry.
Yes.
And we also did an interesting thing. We kind of worked the other way around. We started with the language, and then we went to the intentions.
Yeah.
Because what you did then beautifully was that you solved the beginning, because you came into it with great pressure and a great need to tell us about it. And you found your intention, and it made the language come alive.
Yes.
So I'm not saying that the character isn't important. I'm saying it's valuable at times to start with the text only.
Good for me, it's the only way. It must be for me.
That's
Otherwise,
Yes,
I
because if you did it the other way
impose.
around and had all the emotion and you didn't have the language, then we wouldn't understand what it was you were saying, and then the play wouldn't have its right kickoff.
That's
would it?
right. I think there's a big lesson in that.
Yes.
Good. Here is a rather harder example. In Henry V, the Lord Grand Pré is describing to the French the condition of the English army.
Why do you stay so long, my lords of France? Yon island carrions, desperate of their bones, ill-favouredly become the morning field. Big Mars seems bankrupt in their beggared host, and faintly through a rusty beaver peeps. The horsemen sit like fixed candlesticks, with torch staves in their hand, and their poor jades lob down their heads, hanging the hide and hips, the gum down roping from their pale, dead eyes, and in their pale, dull mouths the gimmelbit lies foul with chawed grass, still and motionless. And their executors, the knavish crows, fly o'er them, all impatient for their hour. Description cannot suit itself in words to demonstrate the life of such a battle.
Description cannot suit itself in words to demonstrate the life of such a battle. Well, the function of this speech in the play is clearly choric. The things described obviously matter more than the character of the subject. The language is so heightened and peculiar that it's clearly the most important thing. So maybe one should say character doesn't matter here. Or does it? Or is there indeed any character at all?
Oh, surely, yes. And it always matters. It's not enough to say that a speech is simply choric or simply descriptive. And although in this piece Shakespeare doesn't tell us what Grand Pré had for breakfast or whether he was bottle-fed when he was a baby, but he clothes the character in such rich text that the actor can find, I think, a variety of characters if he looks carefully enough.
That's right. You've said it, haven't you? The text is the character. The text fills him out.
Yes. Entirely.
Good. Here's an example of Shakespeare introducing a new character into a play in a very emotional and personal situation, and yet giving her at the same time a choric function. In Julius Caesar, Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, comes to tell him that the day is ominous. Now, don't fall into the trap of trying to play the heightened language up because it's heightened. Try to search out that language and find the meaning of all the images that you see. What were they? Why did they happen? So search them rather than demonstrate them.
Right.
Have a go.
What mean you, Caesar? Think you to walk forth? You shall not stir out of your house today.
Caesar shall forth. The things that threatened me ne'er look but on my back. When they shall see the face of Caesar, they are vanished.
Caesar, I never stood on ceremonies. Yet now they fright me. There is one within, besides the things which we have heard and seen. Recants most horrid sights seen by the watch. A lioness hath whelped in the streets, and graves have yawned and yielded up their dead. Fierce, fiery warriors fought upon the clouds, in ranks and squadrons and right form of war, which drizzled blood upon the Capitol. The noise of battle hurtled in the air. Horses did neigh, and dying men did groan, and ghosts did shriek and squeal about the streets. Oh, Caesar, these things are beyond all use, and I do fear them.
Very good. Very good. You did that beautifully. Now, let's look at Casca the conspirator in Julius Caesar.
Who offered him the crown?
Why, Antony.
Tell us the manner of it, gentle Casca.
I might as well be hanged as tell the manner of it. It was mere foolery, I did not mark it. I saw Mark Antony offer him the crown. Yeah, it was not a crown neither, it was one of those coronets. And as I told you, he put it by once, but for all that, to my thinking, he would fain have had it. Then he offered it to him again. Then he put it by again. But to my thinking, he was very loath to lay his fingers off it. And then he offered it the third time. But he put it the third time by, and still, as he refused it, the rabblement hooted and clapped their chopped hands and threw up their sweaty nightcaps and uttered such a deal of stinking breath because Caesar had refused the crown that it had almost choked Caesar, for he swooned and fell down at it, and for my own part I durst not laugh for fear of opening my mouth and receiving the bad air.
Prose. Terse, reductive and cynical. Now listen to him 60 lines later describing the same supernatural storm which we've just seen Calpurnia talk about.
Are you not moved when all that sway of earth shakes like a thing unfirm? Oh, Cicero! I have seen tempests when the scolding winds have rived the knotty oaks, and I have seen the ambitious ocean swell and rage and foam to be exalted with the threatening clouds, but never till tonight, never till now, did I go through a tempest dropping fire. Either there is civil strife in heaven, or else the world, too saucy with the gods, incenses them to send destruction.
Good. Now, almost every actor who plays Casca, I think, finds the switch from the prose scene to the verse scene, because he's so different, a big problem. What do you think about it?
Well, I think, yes, it is hard, but I think that just literally over the last 2 minutes while we're working on it, I had one of those gifts, those little revelations. You cannot have somebody who always exists on an hysterical level coming in and reacting to something extraordinary, because he's cried wolf. He's cried wolf so often that you think, oh, well, it's Casca blowing his top again. But if it's somebody who is always laid back, always obeying, nothing surprises him, nothing shocks him, and you suddenly find him in a terrible state, I think that it hopefully will convey to the fellow characters, actors and audience that there is something deeply disturbing going on, and were Casca always in heightened verse. If that was his plane of existence, I think that there would be no hiatus in the play, that the audience wouldn't think, oh, there must be something terrible happening. But if
Shakespeare often does that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He goes into illogic. I mean,
I'm sure that's the point, that Shakespeare's drastic change is totally deliberate, and because it's the cool man going berserk, actually the storm becomes more real, because it's affecting that man.
Yes.
And what's great in the playing of it is if you go for each scene totally as it comes and commit to it, and you don't try to iron out the inconsistencies, because after all human beings and all of us are pretty inconsistent.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes.
Shakespeare does this over and over, a seeming inconsistency which is entirely deliberate on his part. In The Merchant of Venice, for instance, when Bassanio comes to choose the caskets, Portia's first speech to him is fairly naturalistic.
I pray you tarry. Pause a day or two before you hazard, for in choosing wrong I lose your company, therefore forbear a while. There is something tells me, but it is not love. I would not lose you. And you know yourself, hate counsels not in such a quality.
A little while after, when she bids him choose the caskets, the text becomes poetic and heightened.
Away then. I am locked in one of them. If you do love me, you will find me out. Let music sound while he doth make his choice. Then if he lose, he makes a swan-like end, fading in music. That the comparison may stand more proper, my eye shall be the stream and watery deathbed for him. He may win. And what is music then? Then music is even as the flourish when true subjects bow to a new crowned monarch. Such it is as are those dulcet sounds at break of day that creep into the dreaming bridegroom's ear and summon him to marriage. Now he goes, with no less presence, but with much more love than young Alcides when he did redeem the virgin tribute paid by howling Troy to the sea monster. I stand for sacrifice. The rest aloof are the Dardanian wives, who with bleared visages come forth to view the issue of the exploit. Go, Hercules. Live thou, I live. With much, much more dismay I view the fight than thou that makes the fray.
Good. Portia isn't just switching into romantic language, she's trying to find the words she can to express her situation, and that's what you did. Good. No, all of you come in a moment. On what we've explored so far, and we were going for the heightened language, I think somewhere along the line overall, maybe we could all have gone a bit farther. I don't know what you felt, but I felt we could have been a bit more daring.
More?
What do you think?
Well, it's limits, isn't it? I mean, art is limits. How far can you go before you've broken a limit and rendered it unintelligible? I mean, how far would you...
Well, personally, I go very far, but of course it's the old question again of balance, isn't it?
What you personally would go?
Personally, I'd go
I mean,
further,
you yourself would.
I think you've been put on the spot.
No, you should.
I think you've been subtly manoeuvred up to a spot.
John, would you like
Cue
to show us
music.
how you yourself personally might?
Cue music.
Yes.
Right,
End
what-
credits.
Right, what do
you
I
should
do?
the Henry V.
Harold, Montauk.
No, the
old
list
French
of the,
king.
List of the French knights, right?
French king.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, a quiz. This is.
Are you going to use an
Get in
accent?
the big chair.
You're going to use an accent?
I don't think I'll do it in Elizabethan English, but what I might try and do is to do it in my idea of what an Elizabethan actor might be like. So I might go a bit far with it, and if I do, you can tell me. All right? Let's try.
This is your set.
Oh, all right.
A modest little chair.
All right. I'll also try doing something which we haven't mentioned, which is tending to try to pronounce every single sound within a word. I think the Elizabethans may have done that more than we do. So I'll over-stress the sounds and see what happens.
You sound like an Elizabethan actor.
I'm going to
Would,
try.
so.
All right.
Going too far.
Where is Montjoy, the herald? Speed him hence. Let him greet England with our sharp defiance. Up, princes, and with spirit of honour edged more sharper than your swords, high to the field. Charles de la Breath, High Constable of France, you Dukes of Orleans, Bourbon and of Berry, Alençon, Brabant, Bar and Burgundy, Jacques Chatillon, Rombieurs, Vaudemont, Beaumont, Grand Pré, Roussy and Falconbridge, Foix, Lestral, Bouciquelt and Charolois, high dukes, great princes, barons, lords and knights, for your great seats now quit you of great shames. Bar Harry England, that sweeps through our land with pennons painted in the blood of Harfleur. Go down upon him, you have power enough, and in a captive chariot into Rhone, bring him our prisoner. Seriously, was that too far or not too far?
Not to my taste. Not to my ear. No.
No.
It was like a fruit cake stuffed with lots of different ingredients.
And also, it started at the beginning, and there was this amazing thread that went right the way through. You never let it drop or let us flag for 1 second. I mean, it just kept on going like a huge, relentless wave. It was marvelous.
Did the speech take us with you?
Never lets us off the hook when it's done that way. No, it does take. Yes, it swept us right.
Was that Rouen? Rouen? Or
No, I said Rhone, R-O-A-N, because that's how it's spelled in the folio. And of course, it makes a much better verse line. In a captive chariot into Rouen sounds a bit of a hiccup, but in a captive chariot into Rome is much more resonant.
It's wonderful to hear that, because all our literature and playwriting today seems to be obsessed with the lack of language. You know, the absence of a text sometimes, you know, spaces, pauses. And to hear that so thickly encrusted and each different kind of shape and movement in the sounds. It's
What it is energy, isn't it? I mean, it's actually, it requires a fantastic amount of energy to use this language well. I mean, our modern thing, as you said, with pauses, I mean, a lot of our things is modern writing is thrown away and deflated. But a speech like that requires a fantastic drive and energy, which is also something we need to hold on to and remember.
It's as if Shakespeare means each name to stand for 5,000 men. So by the end of the speech, you've had the whole of the army.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what are the key points we should remember from this exploration? It seems to me that the most important one is that the characters need the language to express their situation and their characters.
Yes, you can't say that their language is remotely incidental. Their language is them, and that should be our starting point.
And then we have to keep this balance between the Elizabethan tradition and our tradition. It's always that word balance. Perhaps in one or two of our versions we may have gone a bit too far one way. Perhaps in others we've gone too far naturalistically. The melancholy truth is that in performance it's hardly ever perfect. It goes too far one way and too far another. There's no perfect answer.
Let your own discretion be your tutor.
Yes.
That's right. That's the way it goes.
You're coming up with these things.
That's the
It's
way
not
it
me.
is. I think all we can say is that if the situation is right and the character's right, and if you find and fresh mint the language, you won't be far off. So as ever, the moral and the rule is, make the words your own words.